Simsy Rob back with you. And today we're back on the 60 MGA and it's time to get started on the door top rails. And this video is mainly going to be focused on some of the issues with those rails that you're going to face when you start doing them. Let's get going. Now really, we should have started on the cockpit rails before we even started the carpet, but I wasn't quite ready to start on the cockpit rails yet, because I was still trying to put together some of the little bits and pieces, hardware, and some of the stuff to make it all work. And I just wasn't really quite ready to tackle those yet, and you'll see in a minute why. So one of the issues I wasn't really quite ready to tackle these never quite fit right. You know, aftermarket parts these days never quite fit. And a lot of people complain about them. But in this case, these parts here have been a little off for 20 years that I know of, and they've never changed them. I'll show you later, but these are way too thick here, and it doesn't quite come together. But and when I got to these things, got them out of the trunk, the owner had started working on these things, and rather than getting the proper hardware kit for these, which actually has little like baskets that go in here with a bolt and another plate, he didn't want to buy all those, so he just drilled them and ran countersunk machine screws through there. Is that right? No. Will it work? Yes. So we're just going to roll with that and stick with doing this. But the other thing he did, which you don't want to do, is he actually, on the other side there, he had just put this together, clamped it, drilled it, ready to screw this together. You don't want to do that. You have to fit it to the car first to make sure you're fitting the car before you try to put these two halves together. It's like, in this case here, I've already got this together, but you know, you want to get this in here, and on both sides you got to play with it so that you get it on this about the same distance here on both sides, and fitting about the same here on both sides. Find that happy medium, get everything clamped down, sitting where you want it, and then mark these for the screw holes. That way you know they fit the car. Because like in this case, look at the gap I had to build here to make this one fit this door. Where the other side, I actually had to file this out, change this angle, and shorten it a little bit to get it to fit that door. So always fit to the car before you commit to anything. So one of the other issues I had is this has a ever so slight bow this way, so it rocks on the door. That's not a big problem because when you bolt down, it'll correct itself. But this one was bowed this way too much and it doesn't line up to the door. So if you know anything about wood and working with wood, you can do a little bit about that by soaking it and clamping it so that you pull that out of it, which I'm having to do with this one. Now, some of the big issues with these things is just like look at this here. This one's drilled close to the inside of the door, and this one's drilled close to the outside of the door. You know, they're not that consistent. Probably they have a jig, they're drilling them, and they probably put one in them upside down. And this is what we got to deal with all the time on these. Now, don't just automatically just rush to like MGOC or Moss and just complain to them how they have crappy parts, right? This is the market we live in. This is the world we live in. It's happening to a lot more than just British cars. And you also have to remember, this is very low production number stuff. There's very few companies that would even want to make these and the kind of numbers that these are being made in, and are willing to make them for the price that MG owners are willing to pay. Well, let's face it, the average British car owner is thrifty, shall we say? So yeah, they're slamming these things out as quick as they can with probably low paid workers just trying to get them done. So you got to deal with this crap. So the other problem with these is dimensions, the actual outside dimensions of these things. They are too tall this way. You can see big difference between this piece and this piece. And this is an aftermarket one. We still see almost the same difference on the original ones, between the original piece and the new ones here. And this is something that's even documented on the MGA Guru site. It's been like this for many, many years. He said he had problems because they were too thick on his car. And what you get is, when you put this in there, then you have to then you got a washer and then you got the nut. Well, then you have that much sticking out here. But what you got to remember too is, once this is on top of the door, you're going through 3 thicknesses of metal, which are going to take all of that up. Now you're sitting about flush. Well, then you got to cover this. This is going to be covered effectively 2 layers of leather, because you got a layer up here and a layer wrapping around here. Then you have the welting that goes along the length of it, which is then 2 layers of vinyl. So then by the time you get it, you might end up having to take the washer completely off to even get this to just barely thread and get enough thread to hold anything. And that's a common issue. What I'm probably going to end up doing is, I got a belt sander. I'm probably going to take a little off the top of this so that it's closer to this height. And you have to look at all this stuff. This is going to have to all be filled in with something. You can use body filler, wood putty, epoxy, whatever you want, to get all this stuff smooth, because this will all show through the leather when you cover it. And then with this replacement one, I've got to work this edge here and get this off, because that's not going to work either. Now this is some of the parts that make up the assembly for the front padding. The front rail padding goes across on top of the dashboard. So you got this piece here. You have these T-bolts that go through there, and then this rubber that goes on there, and this all gets covered. Well, these are obviously just run out on a bandsaw. I don't know how long he's actually had this for, but they may potentially by now be CNC cutting them. I don't know. It'd be nice if they were, because they run them on a bandsaw, and this whole top edge here just is wavy. And that's going to show through when you cover it. Now, I've been working on this a little bit, sanding it, trying to smooth it out some to make it less wavy and much more smooth arc. But you want to fit this to the car. Make sure this fits to the car, and also make sure these are nailed in the right places so that this ends up at the ends of the dash where you want them, because it's possible that they could nail these off a little bit crooked or slightly off and not be quite where you want them. So you want to check that too. Now, the rubber that goes on there has a groove in the back of it that's offset. And that is for this to be able to sit in that groove so it doesn't create a lump on the front side. And we got about 3/16 of an inch here and about 3/8 here. So I marked those markings on here, and we'll see here, only this one here is actually centered, to where this actually sits in the middle like you want it to. The rest of them, yeah, not exactly. So that's another thing you got to deal with. You're either going to have to take a razor blade and trim this out, or deal with this by maybe slotting this a little bit, because once you can slot that, and once you put this in there, the spikes will hold it. And it kind of depends, what you do with it kind of depends on how this fits to the car and how it lines up to all the holes. You need to look at that first too. And these aluminum pieces here, like this is a replacement one that goes on the back corner. But you can see that these things don't line up. You need to be able to stick a screw through there and a nut there to hold it, and none of that lines up. So you got to carve on that a little bit so you can put the nut in. And then you got all these, and then the other thing is, before you cover this, you want to go in here on these holes and actually make sure you can get the screws into those holes for the hardware that goes on here, like the turnbuckle and stuff, because you might end up having to drill it out slightly or run a tap in there or whatever in order to make that screw fit in there, because the last thing you want to do is have this thing covered and then break that screw off. So I always pre-fit those things, make sure the screws will fit before I cover them. So like I said in the last video, we're not going to be doing a full like how-to, in-depth, detailed on all these rails. More of an overview kind of a thing, and we won't even get into the meat and potatoes of that in this video. This video is more about just saying, you know, be prepared. When you start jumping into this stuff, you're going to spend some time on it. It's going to take time to get this right, and you're going to have to deal with issues, not only because of production differences in the car, but also variances in the aftermarket parts. And they become very apparent doing these parts that are right here. I mean, they're right there where you're going to see them. And every time you get in the car and lay your arm on that, you're going to go, ugh, if you didn't get it right. So it pays to really think about it, take your time, really look at the stuff, and address the issues up front, and really work with them before you start covering them. But, you know, aftermarket parts, it's just what we're dealing with.